portal. You may not see any questions about the classic model on your exam. Whether your deployment is a single resource or to a group, or you use a template to create a group or manage dependencies, the Azure Resource Manager is a key consideration which acts on your behalf. There's nothing that you need to install. It updates automatically. It is highly available across regions and globally. And currently, you're able to use this resource manager to allow you to interact with resources and tags and governance. So a key component of the exam is understanding that Azure Resource Manager is that tool or that layer of management that allows you to track your execution and create dependencies between all of the layers of resources that you see here. There's also a consideration for how it authenticates to interact with all of the services that your subscription is connected to and how those resource providers are enabled. So it would be a great idea to understand how to enable and disable resource providers as it relates to ARM. Azure Resource Manager enables us to work with resources as a group. So this consistent management layer allows us to audit, to update, to deploy or delete in a singular coordinated operation. It provides security, auditing, and tagging features as well. So we have the Azure Resource Manager to thank for that. And from our learning journey, we know that there are a lot of tools, to include the ones that we mentioned in the last slide, that allow us to create declarative syntax as well to manage these resources. Some of the benefit for using ARM would be to give us the ability to create repeatable deployments in our solution throughout a development lifecycle using ARM templates. ARM, Azure Resource Manager, in conjunction with JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, allows us to create ARM templates. A template is a structured approach to deploying our resources using a format where we can define infrastructure as code to test, to share, to redeploy resources very quickly. So for the exam, if we're looking at this ARM template, we may want to know the components. We should know the components required to create a resource manager template with definitions for what resources can be deployed either into resource groups or as a single operation. Some of the key benefits to include faster deployment, more repeatable structure for infrastructure as code, and the syntax, the declarative syntax or JavaScript object notation, that JSON syntax that we saw in the last slide. Also with that, all of the components for creating an ARM template, to include the schema, content version, parameters, variables, functions, resources, and outputs. Some of these components are optional and some are required. So a question may ask you, of these offerings or these various components, which are required and which are not. We know the correct answer to be schema, content version, and variables. We can't have a template without these three things. So memorizing or remembering that these components are required while the other are optional would be a great way to manage your knowledge of ARM templates before the exam. Also think about orchestration here. How would you orchestrate a template? Where would you go in the portal to review an existing template or create a new one? Either through a resource that you already have deployed or to the deployment center to create a resource from a quick start template would be another example to create the same process multiple ways. And then we have the Azure Compute Gallery. The Azure Compute Gallery helps you build structure and organization around your Azure resources, like images and application. It provides global replication, grouping and versioning of your resources for easy management, premium storage support, replication strategies that are highly redundant, like ZRS, zone replication, scaling for your deployments with resource replicas, and some sharing of your identities that are mapped to your Azure Active Directory tenant and management using RBAC, even across subscriptions. To create a singular compute resource, we know from our learning journey that an Azure virtual machine, and any of the associated resources can be created through the portal, through the browser interface, or with any other systematic creation deployment approach, like IaaS. So know the various ways to deploy a virtual machine. Also understand the components that are required or optional for virtual machine creation or configuration. We have the ability to start out with some basic requirements like project details to include the subscription and any associated resource group you might map a virtual machine to. You absolutely need to choose an operating system for a virtual machine, either from the marketplace or through some other image deployment type. Know those. You have optional access to create data disks during deployment or after. So during the time of creation or as an incremental addition. add later. There are various types of data disks, right? HDD, SSD disks, some ultra performance disks, and those will have everything to do with the SKU or stock keeping unit that gives you an abundance of features that align to those offerings. So you do have some options there. And to further that thought, you may be asked where, again, the data disk might be stored. From the previous functional group, if you joined me for that, you'd know that that would be Azure Storage, inside of Storage Account as a page blob. Networking components define what portion of your virtual infrastructure this virtual machine will live in, and how it will communicate with other things will be something that you optionally map. As well as backup, monitoring, auto shutdown, which could give you some cost savings, and configuration of agents and scripts, which are optional deployments as extensions. We remember this from our study. Extensions that we can use during deployment or post-deployment. Managing our virtual machine sizes is very easy and simple. From our study, we know that we can choose a virtual machine option or size as a choice from our wide variety of offerings to mix the type of compute, memory, storage, to create some sort of version of a virtual machine that you'd like to see implemented. So you can choose from a variety of these VM sizes, which give you the type of workload that you'd like to run and customize to your environment based on the size. So very important here that you kind of associate or know the association of the size to some of the use cases and types that you could see on the exam, like the D series being most popular for general compute resources, or N series for GPU enabled or based workloads, maybe for data science needs. That would be an example that you could see on the exam. Which of these would be used for high-end computational theory virtual machines? Which one would support that? The correct answer in that case would be N, if your options were N, D, or B, for example. Now, let's recap what we need to know of application workload connectivity options. Before we deploy a virtual machine, we might want to think about where we need to use this virtual machine, where it needs to run. When we create and run a virtual machine that needs to live in a specific domain, have network connectivity, we should think through the placement of how this workload will interact with our virtual network infrastructure. Network connectivity can be provided in one of two ways. You can create a virtual network subnet, so a smaller isolated version of a larger VNet. Remember, a subnet is going to be a segment of the larger virtual network. And as VMs are a part of the same virtual network, they can automatically perform name resolution and communicate with Azure AD, Azure Active Directory, domain services, domain controllers for name resolution. We can also configure Azure Virtual Network Peering for managed domains virtual network. So mapping connections from one virtual network to a separate virtual network using what's called a peering. When you configure a virtual network peering, you must also think about things like name resolution with DNS and any settings that could potentially block communication from one area to another. You want to resolve those, right? Usually, you only use one of these network connectivity options, and that choice will be dependent on how you wish to manage and separate your Azure resources. Speaking of resources, we talked about resource groups in a previous module. Resource groups, again, allow us to choose to create a grouping, a logical grouping or container of items that have similar life cycle. We will place a virtual machine inside one and only one resource group. So true or false, can a virtual machine live in multiple resource groups? Absolutely not. But we can use a resource group to manage the life cycle for all the items within it, incrementally adding or removing resources as needed. We can also use resource groups as a way to transfer resources from one life cycle group to another. So know the differences between the options that you or operations that you can and can't perform with a resource group. And in this case, for virtual machines specifically, may not be true for other objects. We can create a virtual machine and move it to a new resource group with move functionality. We can also move across subscriptions as well. So understand the implications for moves within resource groups for the object that we're talking about specifically, in this case, compute resource. It might be different for other virtual networking objects or other objects in Azure that do require recreation versus move operations. Another component that we'd like to discuss or think about when we're creating a virtual machine is the addition of data disks, which we mentioned could be added during the creation of a virtual machine deployment or after. So we have the option to use the portal to determine our virtual machine size and the number of maximum data disks that can be attached in that operation would be determined by the size of the virtual machine that we deploy if we're going to use that virtual sizing option. So in this case, we see an example of creating a new virtual machine disk where we would store our data. Know the pricing options, not necessarily the dollars and cents, but the feature set that's associated with choosing one virtual machine data disk type over another. Understand that you can choose to encrypt your data at rest. It is the default encryption option at rest using a platform managed key as the default option, or bringing your own managed keys to create secret management for your data disks. So a couple of key benefits to sitting for this exam is understanding some of the feature sets, the comparison and contrast, and being super prepared to see those examples. You can create resources to support communication of your virtual machines as well, and configuring VM network settings would be the best way to configure those items or to customize those items, to include the following. Your network interface card or NIC, you should have at least one. There will be one deployed to each virtual machine type during deployment. And this is how your virtual machines are going to talk to your network. This supports that interconnection between your virtual network and your VM. You can also customize your IP selection, so know the difference between private and public IPs and what they can talk to. Private IPs are going to stay internal to the Microsoft backbone. What does that mean to you? It's all of the network connectivity where your virtual machines or your other resources will use to support internal communication to an environment on the Microsoft network specifically. Or public IPs, you want communication to the internet. And which of these SKUs or stock keeping units that you can select for IPs would support each of these types of communication. Know that for the exam. Additionally, supporting communication for our virtual machines, we would need to determine our virtual network segments, our subnets. Optionally, we can communicate or restrict rules or add additional rules to restrict or allow, deny or allow inbound or external communication using NSGs. These are all optional. Know which of the IP addresses, which of these SKUs have options for closed communication automatically, which type of SKU would offer that, if that's something that you'd like to deploy. And then optionally, we can add load balancers to help us manage that traffic and balance communication between our load. Now, let's talk about high availability for a minute. Azure ensures that your virtual machines within an availability set run across multiple physical servers, compute racks, storage units, and network switches. So optionally, during deployment or later, we can choose to create high availability using virtual machine availability sets in a logical feature or as a logical feature, which ensures that our group of related virtual machines are deployed so that if there is a point of failure, we're not affected. These are all these assortment of virtual machines are not upgraded at the same time, so we don't lose host connectivity within our data center. We are minimizing that risk. So understand the maximum and minimum requirements for selection of fault versus update domains when you're creating a highly available set of resources. Your goal here is configuring availability sets for redundancy, or maybe you structure those sets in application tiers for web versus database. Maybe you combine with a load balancer as an option. And maybe you might be a great idea to think about the differences between managed and unmanaged disks, something you definitely want to know for the AZ-104. What are the implications with managing the underlying storage? How does creating, for example, an availability set affect your service level agreement? This might be required by an organization. You need at least 2 or more instances of compute resources in an availability set to achieve a certain SLA. And of course, remember your stock keeping units, which equal the feature set associated with your deployments. Now let's move on to skill sets, which also give us the ability to deploy multiple virtual machines uh, per configuration. A virtual machine skill set is a set of compute resources resources that we use to deploy and manage a set of identical virtual machines. So great idea to remember that we do have some limits, some default minimum and maximums here. Understand what that looks like. Understand that we can actually choose the type of hardware that we have supporting our virtual machine skill sets. So the size, again, similar to what we saw with virtual machines. In a skill set, we by default are going to use managed disks, and we do have the ability to scale up to 1,000 virtual machines, but there are some implications for creating scaling or skill sets above 100. So know what your limits are. You don't have to memorize limits, of course, but it is a good idea to understand that your scaling option does give you a set of instance count by default and a certain number of a certain way to exceed your limits in some cases, where you can scale horizontally scale or automatically scale. This is the richness of having a skill set. You can map multiple rules, know the differences between these three types of scaling options, which is instance, which is power related, and how are you going to create certain auto scaling policies to manage either a period-based time period extension of a skill set or a metric condition or multiples. And for every scale out rule, there should also be a scale in rule. Containers. Off to chatting about containers. Containers are going to offer us a way to bundle our source code and any of the dependencies and run them together on a node of some sort of compute resource. So please understand the differences between a virtual machine and a container, which would offer the fastest startup time. We describe containers as being pretty lightweight isolations from the host and other containers but maybe not having as strong of a security boundary. It does have a security boundary as a virtual machine. Containers allow us to run in the user portion of an operating system, and we can tailor that portion to contain just the services we need. You're able to use other resources like Docker to package the code and all of the dependencies for mapping your microservices to your nodes. You're also able to add persistent storage. Which of those types can you add? Might be a great idea to remember. Azure Disks or Azure Files if you want to mount a mapped file share essentially from a storage account. We also get fault tolerance, so please understand some of the features, the benefits, the differentiations between containers and virtual machines. There are a couple different options for Azure to work on containers. One of them is called Azure Container Instances. Azure Container Instances, what we know from our slide, Paris of access for quick startups. Those are features that you may see as an option on your exam. Very similar to ARM templates, but you're going to provide with so there are some comparison. And in contrast, that you definitely want to understand to give you great success before sitting for the AZ-104. Great to understand that a container group is useful for building a sidecar for logging or monitoring, or maybe you have one group that is responsible for the web app and the other one is responsible for monitoring. So a group gives you a fair amount of access for quick startups, but definitely want to compare and contrast ACI with other options such as Kubernetes for the exam. You can also deploy a multi-container group option with a YAML file. YAML file is a way to configure a container group. You're going to provide, with a YAML file, provides us a convenient way to configure a container group for repeatability, repeatable deployments, and we're able to be very concise in nature as to what we'd like to have deployed when our deployment includes only container instances. So we can be descriptive. A YAML file, remember from our study, gives us a place to define the configurations associated. We mentioned Docker. We kind of flashed past Docker a second ago, but Docker is not necessarily but consider Docker available on both Linux or Docker Hub. Usually that will be associated with repository. The engine, the server, the REST API, and the client are all components you should know. Incidents and differences between the skills hosted portion. And you do have, these are all great ideas. So a way to deploy HTTP-based service for hosting web apps, REST APIs, mobile backends, for example. We can run applications that can scale easily on Windows, on Linux. A great idea to understand, and we absolutely, we can, with no pun intended, absolutely we can. An app service plan or app services allows us to take advantage of features to include continuous integration with repositories like DevOps, GitHub, based on your plan or feature set. So don't forget to remember that most of your resources in Azure do have tiers or licenses or SKUs or AKA features. And app service plans allow you to choose to configure the plan that works best for you. You will create an app service plan in a specific region. You can have multiple app service plans. But they are pinned to a region where you will create plans in your AZ-104 exam that hypothetically mentions an existing environment that has an app service plan with multiple applications in it. And maybe it asks you the correct solution. Is this one correct? Is the next option correct? Maybe the third option says that I'm able to move application service plans without any downtime to my application. So which one is true or false? We know that to be true. So it may give you multiple examples of how to execute one solution, and you'll have to pick the best option before moving on to another question. So a case study or a simulation could go that way. Certain app service plans do allow scaling, and this brings us back to memorization of what's available per plan. Every app service plan does basically consumption-based. your settings based on how you'd like to move that code. So definitely a great idea to put that into your pocket. Creating app service plans looks a little like this. We have a few portions or steps within the full life cycle of an app service if we're going to create an app service plan. Step 1, create the app service. Think about how you're going to secure the app service. Customize any domain names that maybe if you want to bring in a custom domain name, validate it, understand how you have to map that DNS registry or set up that registry or zone mapping for that app service plan. Don't forget to think about backup. Of course, you're going to configure your network settings to coordinate your communication within your virtual network, as well as those settings. Are you able an application consisting of microservices? The correct answer is number 4, containers with Azure files. So we're able to mount file shares that our containers will use and think which of the following resources are deployed in this template. Let's see, we have a JSON template with a schema, which is required, with resources, which are required. And okay, is storage account and network security group as types that we would manipulate in this JSON template. Let's review what we've covered in
Hello and welcome to this training for managing difficult conversations. In this training, I share with you everything you need to know to prepare and lead a difficult discussion. My name is Jamal Azhar. I'm an author and speaker, and my goal through this training is to help you master the steps to follow to prepare and carry out a difficult conversation, whether it is in the context of a discussion with a manager who spoke to you badly, a colleague who does not do what you ask of him, or in the Private circle, for example, a friend who has made a remark to you that you have trouble digesting. In this training, we do not talk about theory. I promised you a practical training that goes straight to the point. This is why I keep this introduction as short as possible. First, I would like us to look at the origins of these difficult conversations. Why are some conversations considered difficult? What makes a conversation difficult is the context in which it takes place. A difficult conversation is often linked to a difficult situation. For example, a colleague always arrives late for meetings. You did a great job, but your raise doesn't reflect it. Someone says behind your back that you are a careerist or an opportunistic. A colleague presented your idea as his. A friend promised you to be there to help you but did not come, and this is not the first time this has happened. These are situations that can be considered difficult or delicate. But what is certain is that you must do something to correct them. What makes these conversations difficult are the reactions that we cannot anticipate from the person in front of us. We do not know how the person in front of us will react. Maybe the person is going to take what we tell her badly. She will respond with something that hurts us. She is going to get angry and make the situation even worse. Maybe the conversation can ruin your relationship. It can create a conflict with this person. These are real fears. By approaching a difficult conversation, you take these risks. But these risks can be mitigated by preparing in advance, by presenting your point of view without necessarily attacking the person in front of you, by saying things clearly, calmly, and remaining open to the other person's point of view. And that's exactly what we will see during the training. Before moving on, I just would like to say 2 words about the organization of the training. This training is in the form of videos, and the different videos follow a very specific order, so I recommend that you follow them in order. And if you want to benefit as much possible from the information of this training, I strongly recommend that you do the various exercises, because you can know all the techniques. If you do not apply them, you cannot get the results you want. And I'm here to help you and answer your questions if needed. Before diving into the details to prepare for the conversation, I'd like us to take a closer look at the fear of approaching these conversations. As we have just seen together, there are risks when you bring up a delicate subject with someone. I think the first step is to change our perception of difficult conversations. And here's an exercise that I would like us to do together. If you can think of a particular situation, if you are currently going through a delicate situation and you know that you have to raise a sensitive subject with someone, how do you see the situation? What words come to mind when you think about this situation? Here, you feel when you think you engage with him, but how do you see this contrary as an opportunity to show him that you want to be as productive? productive as possible by opting source of stress or as an opportunity to show him versus format and the duration or frequency. I find it very important to change our perception of difficult conversations, sensitive topics. I prefer to see these conversations as opportunities which make me feel better saying what's on my mind. I remember at the beginning of my career, I had a manager who changed my projects every 6 months. As soon as I started to get my bearings and started to feel comfortable, he would ask me to work on another project. I felt like a pawn that he moved as he wanted. It weighted heavily on me. I thought maybe I wasn't good. The idea swirled in my head. I ended up taking my courage in both hands during a meeting which was intended to review my objectives for the coming year, and I told him that I did not like to change projects regularly, where everything has to be clear. I made the assumptions that ourselves, we doubt, we stress, we worry, change the way we view difficult to take stock. Now that you have what I told you before about difficult conversations, that you have to approach them to avoid escalating violence. But sometimes the game is not worth the candle. Ask yourself, what will be the impact on your bottom line if you ignore this conversation? How will you feel if you ignore the discussion? Because we all have a limited number of hours and amount of energy during our days. The goal here is to verify that the conversation is useful and will advance you to something, whether it is in terms of results or in terms of your emotional state. I'll give you an example. Let's imagine that you work in a company where the offices are spread over multiple buildings which are close to each other. There are few times when you need to go to a meeting room in another building. During these rare times, you see that the people before you have not erased the board when leaving. You don't use the board anyway, you just use the room. So there is no need to confront people who forget to erase the board to get them to change their behavior. Here, the stakes are very low. You hardly ever go there to the building and don't even use the whiteboard. The people who will do the cleaning will erase it anyway at the end of the day. So save your energy for other activities. On the other hand, if someone is consistently late for your meetings, it has a direct impact on your productivity. In this case, the conversation must take place. Also, what emotions do you feel when you think about this situation? Before going to see the person, you have to take some time to answer certain questions. We start with emotions. How do you feel when you think about this situation? I say situation and not problem because words are important. As I mentioned at the beginning of the training, we can see each situation as an opportunity or a problem. Seeing difficult conversations as opportunities is more constructive. So I deliberately say the word situation and not problem to talk about situations that we would like to improve. So, what emotions do you feel thinking about this situation? For example, let's say that you are a manager and one of your subordinates systematically comes to see you to ask you for help when he is facing with the question he does not know how to answer. So he doesn't look for a solution on his own, he systematically asks you the question. Helplessness because you did not choose to work with, about the emotions that the situation, the emotion in you. If you are aware of it, the emotion will be there, but telling yourself in your head, what would it be? Your version of the fact in a way. It's our version. I will give you an act that we do not see situations as an example. Your manager often arrives late for your meetings. Your story, your version of events could be, he is always late, he cannot manage his time, he is wasting my time. He clearly disrespects me. If your manager is asked for his version of the facts, he can say, oh yes, I know that we have an appointment at 10 a.m. I also know that John, we will call you John, always takes his laptop during his meetings. He can continue to work while waiting for me. 10 minutes, it's not a big deal. You see, the same situation, but two different versions of the facts. So two different stories. I'll give you another example. A somewhat maniacal man finds that his wife never puts things away in the living room. The man says in his head, she never ties up her things. There are always things laying around, and I'm the one who ties up all the time. I'm not her mate. The woman on her side sees that her husband is tidying up the things while being grumpy, and she says, he is a real cleaning psychopath. I come home tired from work. Tidying up once a week on the weekend is more than enough. So you see, it is the same situation, but two completely different versions of the facts. So you need to ask yourself, what story are you telling yourself? What are the facts? Just the facts. What assumptions did you make? For example, we can say that she does not tie it up, so she is lazy. Or he arrives late, which means that he doesn't respect me. So you see that we invent stories in our heads. The other thing that I would like to share with you is that you need to be clear about your goal. What is your goal? What are you trying to accomplish? What is your goal? What is the ideal situation? And this is where a lot of people fail. They know that they are angry. They repeat their story in their head like a broken record. He annoys me, he does this, he does that, but never take the time to define what an ideal situation would be. This does not mean that this is the solution that you will impose to the other person, but visualizing the ideal situation allows you to take a step back from the situation, find out what is important to you. So, before you engage in a difficult conversation, find out what you are trying to accomplish. They want the other person to change their behavior. They want to make the person aware of something. For example, let's say that a relative or a colleague who drinks a lot. They want to make him aware of his excessive alcohol consumption. Be clear about your goals. What are you trying to accomplish? So this was the first step to prepare your conversation. So to summarize, make sure it's a conversation worth having. Be clear about your emotions. What do you feel when you think about the situation? Detail the story you are telling yourself and clarify your goal. In the next video, we'll talk about things to do to you are telling yourself and clarify your goal. In the next video, we'll talk about things to do to organize and start the conversation. Now that you are clear about your goal, so the next step is to choose a place to have your conversation. It's best to have this conversation in a neutral place, like a meeting room that's neither your office nor the office of the other person. If it is a discussion with one person, avoid having this discussion in front of other people. The place is very important because you can speak freely, as does the person in front of you. I have seen managers address personal issues with some members of their team during team meeting. I think it's neither the place nor the time to do it. If you have no other options, your office will do just fine. These are small details that may seem obvious to you, but you cannot in the middle of an open space with lots of if it is a small delicate detail that you want to address, or if it is important to block a time slot to do this. Clearly 2 to 3 to discuss what happened yesterday during the presentation in front of the director. Tell the person that there is a need to address it with you. Make sure that you have permission from the person in front of you. You want to avoid a difficult conversation at all costs when the person in front of you is not in an emotional state that is conducive to discussion. I called this meeting to discuss what happened yesterday at the annual presentation to the directors. I tell you how I experienced the situation. I think we need to talk about it, and I would like to know your version of the facts. Here, the person knows very well that they will have the time to express themselves. They know exactly what you want to talk about, and they also know that you are open because you want to hear their version of the facts. Then it's time to announce your version of the facts. So privilege the I to talk about what you have experienced and what you have felt. Always starts with the facts. So just describe what happened as a mediator would, just telling the facts, and then talk about your feelings, how you felt during the situation. So the facts first, and then how you felt. I will give you a detailed example just after to illustrate the different points. Here I explain just the different steps to follow. Then give the person in front of you time to express their point of view. So once you have finished your version of the facts, ask the person to tell you what they think about it and how they experience the situation. And surprisingly, their version of the events will be different from yours. It is the same situation, but seen from different points. Ask questions to learn more. Practice active listening by rephrasing certain sentences to make sure you have understood correctly. Ask open-ended questions to learn more. You want to avoid guessing what the other person is thinking or what they meant. It is precisely these presuppositions that subsequently create conflicts. If you are unclear, check your assumptions by asking questions. And here's an important point. Do not try to prove that you are right and the other is wrong. It will be a sterile discussion that will lead you nowhere. We all see things in different ways. Even if you think that you are right, be open-minded to see things from the perspective of the person in front of you. Also, think about solutions to put in place. Now that you have stated your point of view, you have heard the point of view of the other person, you are clearer about the other person's version of the facts and also their needs. It's time to think about solutions to put in place that work for both of you. Detailed example in the next video. I think that we understand better with a concrete example. I present to you here a real example from the corporate world. So this example is a real example that I have lived. Of course, I will change the names. We will call them a week before an important for him. Like amateurs in front of the director, don't know who was back. But after a few minutes of presentation, John, the manager, took over, cut Bob off, and finished the presentation alone with Bob standing next to him. It was the neutral version of the facts, so only facts. Here's John's version. We almost looked like amateurs in front of the directors. I really cannot trust Bob. Before, I spent my evening at the conversation. Should he come back to this event and address the point with Bob? Yes, because he is one of the most senior members of his team. He wants to keep him in the team and he cannot let this incident pass without clarification. Regarding his emotions, John finished by only talking about the facts before talking about how he felt. That's why for me during important meetings, and I thought I would give you this opportunity to make this presentation for me. So that was the hard facts part. Then John expresses what he felt. So he says, during the presentation, I found that the explanations were not clear. I saw that the directors were not following your job badly or you did not prepare. He talked about what he noticed and what he felt. Then, before giving the floor to Bob, he added, I'm aware that this situation is not ideal. I would like to find a solution if another opportunity arises in the future where I need you. But first, I would like to know your version of the facts. So what happened? So John clearly announces the objective of the meeting before giving the floor to Bob. Then Bob expressed his point of view by saying clearly that he felt betrayed. John asked him to prepare the presentation and then he does it himself, but rather as which could impact his professional development later. We assume things that can create. I hope now you are clearer on the steps to take to prepare and manage a difficult conversation. You also know that you have to give the other person the opportunity to express themselves and find a solution that suits everyone. Sometimes we don't have the members of your team that a project will be stopped for lack of budget and the they will be transferred to another department. Or you have fallen behind on a task and need to let a client know. These are things that happen and we must assume our responsibilities. First of all, we must mentally prepare for all types of reactions from our interlocutor. If, for example, you have to announce to a subordinate that his project will be stopped due to a lack of budget, you have to be ready to see the person sad, cry, get angry, and so on. It may not be the case, but if you have prepared yourself mentally for this kind of situation, you will be less destabilized. This point is very important. I'll give you an example. Once we were in a meeting with important clients. They were informed of a delay of a project, and one of them let out his anger. He was shouting, he was afraid to not say anything. But one of the managers who was with me let him finish, and then he spoke. Personally, I would delay had been announced to enter the game of the person screaming. Eventually, the 1st of next month, you will know can have different interpretations or way of seeing it. If someone has just been changed teams, it can mean it is a new opportunity. If you announce a delay in a project, explain that you want to deliver a better product here, if you really need it. This is the opportunity, for example, for a new beginning. Use the framing technique. So the same situation can have different interpretations or way of seeing it. Or what you would do if you by telling jokes, but from experience, this is not the time for that. Stay factual. If you are in a managerial position, you are going to have to deliver bad news. You must be prepared. So stay factual, don't beat around the bush, and always be aware of the right time and place. They can also have their influence. Announce them can make a difference in the response you may get. And here are some principles or rules to keep in mind during your call. Use the personal Rules to keep in mind: use the personal pronoun I. Listen to the difference between these two sentences. I feel attacked when someone yells at me, and you attack me when you yell at me. You see, in one sentence, we talk about how we feel about a situation. In the other, we attack the other person directly by blaming them for something. Remember, it's just a matter of interpretation. We may be living the same situation, but about quickly that the importance of language. So avoid phrases like, I heard your point of view, but I would like to say. When you say but, you are canceling everything you have just before. Imagine the number, because a very important point. It's easy to understand, but it is not easy to implement. The point is to separate the behavior, an action, or even several actions that we do not treat. Person is right. Same for you. When someone makes a point or raises a point, you should not take it personally. A lot of people turn on themselves because they use them personally. This is not about you, it is about your behavior. So do not, you see that your ego is distant from your behaviors, from your attitude to criticism, from that you manage, document that you produce, and so on. This point is very important to keep in mind. So do not focus on the person, but on the behavior. Imagine for a moment you have just finished a project or presentation. Common point between is not as for situation, so you begin by describing the situation. The goal is to be as specific as possible in describing the situation. What then? I don't like. I give you an example. Let's say that a colleague arrives late for saying, I don't like when you arrive late. It's a lack of your behavior by the past items on the agenda. Without a particular event that you don't want to have. It can sometimes be difficult to give feedback. Many people will avoid giving feedback at all costs, especially when it is negative. Some managers will do everything to avoid the right intonation and also, but a new recruit once joined a team working. I had to do something still in the trial period. Well, that the other team members, the feedback needs to be prepared. So you need to keep it factual, talk about the facts, and describe how you feel and what you would like. We know it does not make things move forward. You must provide solutions and also listen to the suggestions of the person in front of you. This point is true whether it is a feedback for one of your employees or for your line manager. You take into head people who do not follow company rules. You must first learn to be aware of your issues, because when you have someone in front of you who evokes certain emotions, this is a point to pull him back into line when necessary. It is your responsibility to say that other people are not difficult for fun. They seek with their behavior to satisfy a need consciously or unconsciously. To the person in the work, straight to the point here. Try to understand. Have you ever wanted to implement a change but others did not want to follow you? What we are doing right now, why it is better for new software. You have to believe that there was a serious great. So no matter how much we looking closer, we realize that they were not changing because they did not that people do not resist change for the sake of it. If they don't change, there is a reason for it. And it is up to us to ask questions, to challenge, and to try to understand what is causing them problems and help them in the change. You have to come to understand what is scary about change. Is it the fear of not being capable in a new environment? Is it the fear of failure? Is it the I was part of them. I found it very difficult to say no in a temporary contract that many hours. But every day, there were more and more. Manager will keep giving you things to do as long as you're productive and you will do a project. And it's not very if you go with a 3-step. In this, optionally, you offer an alternative. For example, this and that instead. That way, you let the person in. Thank you for thinking of me to present the project. So you show that you have understood the request correctly. I have. Is it okay to delay? So you present an more opportunity you give to the person. I will give you more. When you talk with someone, there are those who put their cards on, are not in line with the intonation or with the facial expression or the gestures. If you make a proposal, for example, to someone who says,
Of course.
and adopt an asymmetrical expression, neutral words to attack you. This kind of, I'm not sure I fully understand this sentence. Your words mean something, but your intentions, and ask this person, I have the impression that the proposal does not suit you. Are you missing a detail? You will try to use humor or a mistake, and the person impression that, of course, and are you missing? It doesn't matter if you are a manager or an employee. It is your responsibility of others, but you control your actions, and that's how you put limits on people who. I would like us to end the training with this diagram, which shows 3 mental filters that are essential on an ongoing basis. Imagine all the information continuously sent to your brain by all the information that other dogs we have seen in the past. This filter I would like to show some construction work. You can imagine do not manage to finish it, or we lack the resources to do it, or any other problem that my husband is a failure. Here the person removes information to choose and ask to fail. Or one can ask, has he failed at everything he has done in school? Here I'm pay attention to the words nobody, always, never. Phrases like I'm never lucky. Ask questions with astonishment. For example, never, not even once. Lack discipline in what you after the therefore, and are based. I know that you don't want to. Information has been. What makes you say that? Can you read my mind? Any questions to ask? To see you in another training. So that's it. I hope that you found interesting what I shared with you, and I hope also that the different techniques that you learned will help you in your daily work. I would be very grateful if you can rate the training and tell me exactly and specifically what you appreciated the most. In the next article, you will find links to my different social media networks, so you can take the certificate, post it there, tag my name, and I will personally like and comment your post. You will also find another article with links to my other trainings at a very, very discounted rate. So I thank you again for your trust, and I hope to see you in another training.